All right, welcome to the first processing video. Processing is what you're going to be using for your final project. And to get processing, you need to go to processing.org webpage. And processing is a framework. It's an animation framework for Java. There's actually options for other backends, but we're going to be focusing on Java. But essentially, your final project this semester is to use this to create a game or an amusement. So we're going to talk a little bit about, there are more details on the wiki about your specific final project, but I'm going to give you an overview of processing website and the processing IDE. So the processing website, processing.org, this is going to be your primary resource. This is where you're going to go for notes, examples, all that sort of stuff. So on the left-hand side, you should see there's a menu, and that's where a bunch of your resources are. You'll see there's reference, there's tutorials, there's all that sort of stuff. But the first thing that you need to do is be able to download processing. There's a couple different versions. There's a version for the Raspberry Pi, there's a version for Macs, there's a version for Linux. If you're on Windows, you can choose Windows 32, Win32, or Win64. If you have a 64-bit system, either will run. It's just if you only have a 32-bit Windows system, only the Win32 version will run. I would say, you can make the choice. I don't think there are any issues with incompatible libraries and using the Win64 version at this point. If you want to be safe, you can go with the Win32 version. But you download it and you install it, and we'll show you what that, once you've installed it, what the IDE looks like. But I want to take a moment. If you go over to the left-hand side under tutorials, you'll see there are literally tutorials that walk you through all sorts of different aspects of using processing. Okay? And they talk from the basics, working with text, working with objects. There's a ton of tutorials that explain how to use processing, and it sort of explains the language, which is a sort of an additional layer on top of Java. So you can write pure Java in processing, but processing also exposes, think of it as additional subroutines in order to quickly create animations. So what we're going to do is, if you, on the left-hand side, click on a reference, this is usually most people's friend when it comes to learning about processing. It shows you all the different commands that you have available to you in processing. So if you want to, so for instance, rect lets you draw a rectangle, and it gives you examples of, this is the code that you would write, these are the different things that you can pass to it in order to draw a rectangle. Okay? There's also examples, if you want to see examples of different sketches and how people did it, a sample code and all that sort of stuff. So this is essentially your notes for your final project, is going to this website. We're going to record a couple little videos that sort of demo some or answer some frequently asked questions about this, but this is primarily where you will go. All right, switching over to the processing IDE. Once you've got it installed, this is the IDE, or the integrated development environment. This is where you can write the code directly here and run it from this IDE. Now you notice basically you've got your menu up the top, you've got a couple buttons to play the animation, to stop it, to pause, and all that sort of stuff. You've got your editor in the middle, and down at the bottom is actually, that's where error messages will get printed, or if there's a syntax error, all that will appear there. Also, if you do something like a system.out.println, if you remember that from being shown that in Java earlier in the semester when you're doing Hello World programs, you can actually drop, again, Java code in the processing IDE, and you'll see the output of that system.out.println. In one of the later videos, I'll show you an example of sort of how that works. You can make a couple changes to it. If you go to File, Preferences, that's where you can change where it's saving your sketches. By default, it's going to save everything to your Documents folder, and then a folder inside of there called Processing. One thing to note is that whenever you create a new, what they call sketch, okay, you can think of it as a program, but in processing, they call them sketch. Whenever you create a new sketch, it's going to create a brand new folder for that sketch inside of that processing folder in your Documents folder. Okay? There's a couple other tweaks that you can make depending on what you want to do with the preferences. Other important things to note in the IDE, over under Sketch. So Sketch, that's where you can make some tweaks, like if you want to run it from there. You can go to Tools, and depending on the version of processing that you're using, like if you already downloaded it, one of the things about processing there, they update it fairly frequently. I can't remember if it's in Sketches or Tools where you can find libraries. Sketch. Okay. Used to be in Tools, then it's now in Sketch. But one thing that you may want to do fairly soon is if you go to Libraries, you can go to Libraries and actually search. This is where you can bring in, think of these as like modules for Perl. It's basically bringing in additional functionality. And so one of the things that you'll want to definitely do is, because one of your requirements is to use sound or audio or video. So there's a video.processing library that you can download. There's a sound.processing. You'll see some people talking about the minim library. That's also available underneath here, but you want to install, you may have to install specific libraries to get certain functionality, okay? Especially audio and video, you want to install those libraries, okay? And you can actually have both the sound processing and the minim library. They both sort of work differently. I mean, they're both for using audio, but the commands you use to work with them can change. Okay, and depending on the tutorials you're looking at, you'll see different options. Okay, and there might be, you might find something else that you want to do that requires a different library. Just make note of it and make sure you install that library. Additionally, whenever you submit your assignment, make note in the comments about any libraries that are necessary to run your sketch. All right. Like I said, there's the play, the stop. That's sort of a pretty good overview of the processing IDE. In the next video, when we actually write a little bit of code, we'll have you hit play and you'll sort of see how that works.